The water rippled gently, reflecting the golden afternoon light as it weaved through the pebbled creek bed. The sound of flowing water had become a constant rhythm in my life, a natural melody that softened the weight of the world. For 11 years, this creek had been my sanctuary. Nestled at the back of my property in Riverstone Heights, it was a piece of untouched nature in an otherwise growing suburban sprawl. I had bought this house because of it. The soothing sight of dragonflies hovering over the water, the occasional visit from a blue heron, the way the trees arched protectively over the bubbling stream. It wasn't just my retreat, either. Neighborhood kids like Timmy and Sarah Thompson often came to catch tadpoles and watch minnows dart between rocks. Their parents, Dean and Sarah Thompson, trusted me enough to let them explore freely, knowing that the water was only ankle-deep at its fullest. "Mr. Jackson, can we look for tadpoles today?" Timmy called out, bouncing on the balls of his feet at the edge of my backyard. I smiled, waving them in. "Sure thing, but you have to put them back when you're done." The two kids ran past me, giggling, as they carefully stepped from stone to stone, their hands cupped, ready to scoop up any little creatures they found. Watching them, I felt the usual sense of peace. I had no idea that within weeks, this paradise would become a battleground. The trouble arrived in the form of a thick envelope, a pristine white package with Maple Valley Homeowners Association printed in bold, gold lettering on the corner. I frowned as I turned it over my hands. We had never had an HOA before. My street had always been self-regulated, a comfortable mix of older homes with well-maintained yards. I had seen the Maple Valley HOA signs in the newer developments nearby, but I had never imagined they could enforce their rules on us. Curious but wary, I tore the envelope open and unfolded the official-looking letter inside. "Dear resident, we are pleased to welcome you as a member of the Maple Valley Homeowners Association. Due to the recent incorporation of Riverstone Heights into our jurisdiction, your property will now benefit from our proven property value protection strategies. Enclosed, you will find your new community guidelines, your first monthly due statement, your membership agreement, signature required within 30 days. Failure to sign and return this document will constitute automatic acceptance of HOA terms." I read the last line twice. What the hell? I shuffled through the papers. Strict regulations on grass height, no non-standard mailboxes, no backyard vegetable gardens visible from the street, and, at the very bottom, an unexpected rule that sent a cold chill down my spine. Unapproved water features, including ponds, creeks, or fountains, must be either properly fenced and secured or removed within 30 days. I felt a sharp twist of unease in my stomach. I had never needed approval for my creek before. It was natural, not some artificial pond I had dug. I tossed the paperwork on my kitchen table. I wasn't signing anything. 3 days later, a knock at my door changed everything. When I opened it, a woman with a polished smile and icy blue eyes stood on my porch. "Good afternoon. I'm Karen Westfield, Community Standards Director for the Maple Valley HOA." She extended a manicured hand, but I didn't shake it. Instead, I crossed my arms. "I notice you haven't returned your membership agreement. That's because I never agreed to be part of this HOA." I replied. Karen's smile tightened. "I understand your concern, but unfortunately, it's not optional. Your property deed includes a provision allowing for HOA incorporation if 75% of homeowners agree. That threshold has been reached." I gritted my teeth. That couldn't be right. I had owned this property for over a decade. How could someone just force me into an agreement I never signed? Karen reached into her leather folder and handed me a highlighted document. It looked like an official property record, and sure enough, there was a clause buried deep within the fine print. "We're just helping bring consistency to the neighborhood," Karen said smoothly. Then her gaze flicked past me, toward my backyard. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "We'll also need to address that unauthorized water feature," she added. I clenched my fists. "You mean my creek?" "Yes." She gave an almost sympathetic tilt of her head. "We've received complaints that it poses a safety hazard." I took a step forward, towering over her. "From who?" Karen didn't flinch. "That information is confidential. However, the bylaws state that all unapproved water features must be properly fenced or removed within 30 days. 30 days to erase a creek that had existed for decades. I stared at her, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't about safety. It was something else. I spent the next few nights digging through county records, trying to make sense of what was happening. But it wasn't until I walked upstream at dusk that I found something that made my stomach churn. A drainage pipe, half buried in the cattails, leading straight from the newer HOA-controlled development into my creek. I crouched down, running my fingers along the rusting metal. It had been deliberately hidden. I pulled out my phone, snapped several photos, and followed the pipe back toward the houses on Maple Drive, where Karen and Richard Westfield lived. As I approached, the faint glow of a flashlight made me freeze. I ducked behind a tree and watched Richard Westfield step out of a golf cart, holding a dark container. He dumped it into the water. I squinted against the dim light, watching as dead fish floated belly up near the pipe's entrance. Poison. This wasn't just about HOA rules. This was something much bigger. The next morning, I woke up to a new email. HOA violation notice. Urgent. $500 fine issued for unapproved water feature. Failure to comply within 30 days will result in additional fines of $100 per day. I barely had time to process the message before a construction crew arrived at my property with shovels and machinery. Karen, standing smugly beside them, crossed her arms. "You have until the end of the month," she said, "or we'll handle it for you." As the crew stepped toward my creek, I felt something inside me snap. They want to play dirty? Fine, but they had no idea what I was about to do next. The HOA's crew wasted no time. By the end of the week, my creek was gone. The lifeless bed of cracked mud and stranded rocks was all that remained. The once clear water had been diverted into an underground drainage system, its flow erased from the surface. The morning after the final trench was sealed, I walked the length of my ruined backyard, my boots sinking slightly into the disturbed soil. I knelt, running my fingers through dry earth. It felt unnatural, wrong. That's when I noticed something odd. The ground felt damp. I dug my fingers in deeper. The soil wasn't just damp. It was soaked. The water wasn't gone. It was still here, trapped beneath the surface. Suddenly, Karen's plan clicked in my mind. They didn't destroy the water. They just forced it somewhere else. And wherever it was going, it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. It took only 3 days for the first signs of trouble to appear. A heavy rainstorm rolled in that evening, pounding the rooftops and drenching the dry ground. Water had always drained effortlessly through my creek before, but now, with its natural path destroyed, something different happened. At 2 a.m., a frantic pounding on my door yanked me out of sleep. I grabbed my phone and swung the door open to see Elaine Wong, my neighbor from 2 streets over, soaked to the bone. "You need to see this. Bring your camera." Still groggy, I threw on a raincoat and followed her into the storm. As we reached Maple Drive, the HOA's prize street, I froze. The entire road was flooded. Water gushed out of storm drains, flowing in reverse, pushing up instead of draining down. Several houses, including Karen and Richard's massive home at the top of the hill, had water pooling around their foundations. I pulled out my phone and snapped photo after photo. I remembered what Dr. Martinez had told me. Water follows the path of least resistance. With my creek erased, the trapped groundwater had found a new path, straight into their homes. By morning, the damage was impossible to ignore. Richard stood on his flooded driveway, barking orders into his phone as Karen directed neighbors to stack sandbags around their house. But it was too late. Water had seeped into basements, rising through floors, soaking carpets, and warping expensive wooden furniture. I spotted Dean and Sarah Thompson, who had supported the HOA, standing in their front yard, staring in horror at the water bubbling up from their basement stairs. Their kids' toys and books floated in the mess, already ruined. Sarah turned to me, eyes red-rimmed. "This is a nightmare." The insurance adjuster said they won't cover flooding caused by ground saturation. I swallowed hard. This was just the beginning. And the HOA, they had no idea how bad it was going to get. That evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting at the community center. Karen and Richard sat at the front table, their faces tight with stress. Richard cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. We've been in contact with the city. This appears to be a municipal drainage failure. Rest assured, we are demanding immediate action. Murmurs spread through the room. I stood up. That's not true. Karen's head snapped toward me. I stepped forward, holding up my phone. This isn't a city issue. This flooding started 3 days after you destroyed my creek. I tapped my screen, and the projector flashed images of the flood onto the community center screen. Before, my creek, flowing naturally. After, the underground drainage pipes the HOA installed. Now, flooding along Maple Drive, directly following the original creek path. The room fell silent. Karen tried to cut me off. That's a coincidence. There's no scientific proof that. Actually, there is. I pulled out the county flood maps I had researched. I pointed at the blue lines. This neighborhood used to be a wetland. When the creek was here, it acted as a natural drain. But when you erase it, you forced all that water to go somewhere else. Richard's face flushed red. This is just speculation, unless you have actual proof. I do. The room collectively leaned forward. I clicked to the final image. A zoomed-in aerial shot of Richard and Karen's backyard. From last night, with water flooding their perfectly manicured lawn. People gasped. Karen paled. The water wasn't just a neighborhood problem anymore. It was their problem. After the meeting, a group of angry homeowners gathered in the parking lot. Elaine crossed her arms. They're never going to fix this. They're just going to blame someone else and fine us into silence. They've been abusing their power for years, someone else chimed in, making us cut down trees, pay pointless fines, and now this? Sarah Thompson stepped forward, shaking. I don't even know where my family is supposed to sleep tonight. Our house is ruined. Michael Rodriguez, another neighbor, held up a petition. This is a vote to remove the HOA board. We need 75% of homeowners to sign it. I looked at the dozens of furious faces, and I knew this was bigger than just my creek now. This was a war. By morning, the damage was undeniable. Karen and Richard's pristine lawn had turned into a soggy swamp. Water pooled in the streets, and half the houses on Maple Drive had been red-tagged for structural damage. The storm had done something else, too. It had revealed the truth. Where the HOA's hired contractors had buried my creek, the water had eroded through the artificial trenches overnight. In the early morning light, I could see small streams re-emerging, carving their way back into their natural paths. It was only a matter of time before nature reclaimed what was hers. Elaine knocked on my door before I could even pour my coffee. We have a plan, she said, stepping inside. I raised an eyebrow. We... She gestured behind her. Standing on my porch were over a dozen homeowners. Michael Rodriguez spoke up. If the HOA won't fix this, we will. The idea was simple but brilliant. If the HOA had buried the original drainage system, then all we had to do was dig it back up. We formed a group chat using the name Weekend Gardening Club to avoid suspicion. We gathered shovels, tools, and wheelbarrows, claiming we were working on a community beautification project. We weren't just restoring the creek. We were taking back our neighborhood. By Saturday morning, over 20 homeowners showed up to work. The ground was still soft from the rain, making it easier to dig through the packed earth the HOA had used to bury the natural water flow. After just 2 hours, we hit something. Here, Sarah Thompson shouted, wiping sweat from her forehead. A layer of crushed gravel and concrete had been piled over the natural stream bed. Michael gritted his teeth. They didn't just block the creek. They tried to erase it. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires made us all turn. A black SUV came to a halt at the edge of the site. Karen Westfield stepped out, rage twisting her face. This is illegal, she shrieked, storming toward us. You're destroying community property. I stepped forward, wiping mud from my hands. Actually, Karen, we're following Section 12.3 of the HOA bylaws. I held up a laminated copy. Homeowners may perform maintenance on drainage systems to preserve property values. Her face paled. Why, you're misinterpreting that. No, Karen. Elaine said, stepping beside me. You misinterpreted it when you buried a natural creek without telling anyone. A crowd of neighbors gathered to watch the confrontation. Even people who hadn't originally been affected were starting to turn against her. "Why didn't you tell us our homes were built over wetlands?" someone yelled. "My insurance won't cover the flood damage," another voice called. Karen's jaw clenched. "I will not stand here and let you people ruin what we built." I folded my arms. Looks like nature is already handling that for us. Behind us, the ground shifted slightly as more water pushed through the loose dirt. Karen took a step back, as if finally realizing she was losing. "You'll regret this," she snapped before storming off. I watched her drive away, but I already knew her fight was over. That night, another storm rolled in. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel nervous. The work we had done wasn't just symbolic. It was practical. We had dug out the buried streams, allowing the water to flow away from the homes instead of pooling beneath them. By morning, the difference was obvious. Maple Drive had no new flooding, no new basement damage, no backed-up sewers. But Karen Westfield's home, the one she had built on top of a wetland, it was now surrounded by a perfect, shimmering pond, exactly where my creek used to be. A news crew arrived just before Karen did. I stood at a distance, watching as she climbed out her SUV and stared in disbelief at her now submerged backyard. The reporter turned toward the camera. Homeowners claim HOA negligence led to neighborhood flooding. The same HOA that removed a natural creek now finds its own board members at the center of the disaster. Karen looked frantic. She waded through the muddy water, trying to direct landscapers on how to pump it out. But we all knew the truth. The water wasn't going anywhere. That evening, the HOA called an emergency meeting. But this time, they weren't in control. Over 70 homeowners packed the community center, many of them carrying documents and legal papers. Karen and Richard sat at the front table, looking more exhausted than powerful. Richard banged his gavel. "This meeting will..." Michael stood up. "This meeting is over, Richard." He held up a petition. "Over 75% of homeowners have signed a vote of no confidence. You and Karen are removed from the board." The room erupted in cheers. Karen looked stunned. You can't do this. We built this community." Elaine stepped forward, handing her a legal document. "And now we're taking it back." Richard grabbed the gavel, as if trying to maintain control. But nobody was listening anymore. For months later, I sat by my restored creek, watching the tadpoles dart between the rocks. The HOA had been dismantled. A new board had been elected, and one of their first actions was restoring the natural drainage systems. The Westfields had sold their house at a loss. The new owners, they loved the pond, even added bird feeders and a small footbridge to make a scenic feature. Elaine joined me by the creek, handing me a coffee. "You know," she said, "Karen left something behind when she moved." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh," she smirked, pulling something from her bag. It was an old HOA sign. "Danger, water hazard, keep children away." Elaine grinned. "I put it up by the community garden, with a new sign underneath." I laughed. "What's it say?" She smiled. "Nature is not a danger. It's a teacher." I looked at the creek, flowing exactly where it was always meant to be. Sometimes justice doesn't come from laws. Sometimes you just have to let nature take its course.